October 30th, 1995. At last, I successfully enter the tomb of Harwa. Before taking the first steps into the interior, I stayed still for a long time. I was floored by the incredible silence that surrounded me. I found myself in front of an incredible sight, majestic and apocalyptic. The first pillared hall was opening before my eyes, immense and austere, covered with a layer of debris. Time, slow and inexorable, has swept away the pillars, collapsed the ceiling and the walls. November 3rd, 1995. I have completed the exploration of the tomb. There are many signs remaining that show problematic degradation. Excavation and restoration are necessary and urgently needed. The debris doesn't allow us to work on the walls without walking over the stone fragments that still cover the floor of the hall. I've been only able to copy the inscriptions and the scenes carved in the passages between the various rooms. The first results have convinced me that the study of the tomb of Harwa can supply new and vital information for the study of Egyptian culture. I wish to continue, but the proportions of this project are beyond my means. November 7th, 1995. We close the excavation. I leave Luxor wanting to return. Above all, it's the desire and the curiosity of entering the tomb of Harwa again that I feel most strongly. It's an immense enterprise that probably exceeds the limits of the life of a single individual, but I will try in every way to make it possible.
The tomb of Harwa is dug under the limestone of the Assasif plain on the west bank of the Nile near Luxor. In front of the funerary temple of Queen Hatshepsut, erected here in the 15th century before Christ. At this time, Egypt dominated the eastern Mediterranean and Africa from the Euphrates to the fourth cataract of the Nile. Luxor was then known by the name Uaset, the victorious. The city, which had unparalleled magnificence and wealth, extended along the east bank of the Nile and had its center in the temple of Karnak, the vast religious complex dedicated to the god Amun. The impressive architecture of this temple would have provoked astonishment and admiration of the first Greek travelers, causing them to refer to Luxor as the Thebes of 100 gates. On the west bank of the river, temples dedicated to the funerary cult of the kings were erected. Here, where the sun sets, there are also vast necropolis of nobles and the Valley of the Kings, where the pharaohs of the new kingdom chose to have their splendid tombs. But around 1050 BC, a profound crisis upset Egypt. The country was divided into two separate states. The center of the monarchy was moved to the north, in the Delta. The south remained in the hands of the influential clergy of the god Amun. In the course of the next 3 centuries, there were no longer the means or the ability to produce the immense decorated tombs that had been common in the earlier era. Also, the powerful priests of Amun had themselves buried simply enclosed in sarcophagi and surrounded by few funerary objects in shafts dug deep into the cliffs on the riverbank to the west of Luxor. Harwa was the first in centuries to prepare a tomb of such vast proportions and so richly decorated. 8 statues of Harwa are known and are conserved in Cairo, Aswan, London, Paris, and Berlin museums. The inscribed texts on them tell that Harwa was the son of Pademut, a prophet of Amun, whose wife was Nestaureret. Harwa lived in the beginning of the 7th century BC, and his career began with a priestly position of secondary importance. Soon afterwards, he was appointed the Grand Majordomo of the Divina Adoratrice, a position of enormous prestige within the clergy of Amun.
October 27th, 1996. I'm in Cairo, and I have the permits to continue working at Harwa. A year ago, I wouldn't have thought it possible. My desire to go down to Luxor is enormous. I feel like I'm about to begin the most fascinating adventure of my life. October 30th, 1996. The tomb is open. I recruited 4 workmen and decided to begin working in the second pillared hall. Its limited dimensions allowed me to find the best work method, which I will apply subsequently to the interior of the monument. Wednesday, November 1st. The excavation proceeds in the best way possible, but the work conditions are extremely disagreeable. The air is filled with dust, making it hard to breathe, and a thin dust sticks to our skin and enters our lungs. Friday, November 3rd. I'm really excited. Mohammed Sid Ahmed, one of the workmen, hands me a piece of stone that he says is a statue. I notice that it's covered in hieroglyphics. I clean it and examine it in the light and realize that it's a fragment of an Ushabti of Harwa. I take this as a sign of good luck. Sunday, November 5th. The removal of the debris from the hall is going fast. We can conduct preliminary restoration projects. The major problem is the removal of the bat guano. For centuries, these animals were the only inhabitants of the tomb, and their excrement has covered the walls of the second pillared hall with a hard black crust. Tuesday, November 7th. We experimented with various cleaning methods, and at the end we opted for the simplest method that only called for the use of water. It's proven to be the most effective, the least laborious, and the most economical. On the walls of the hall, hieroglyphics and scenes began to reappear. The acidity of the guano has slightly eroded the profiles, but it's still possible to read the texts and appreciate the delicate relief lines of the figures. Thursday, November 9th. While the excavation and restoration continued, I was able to study the tomb in more depth. I went through the labyrinth of corridors and halls. I become more and more fascinated. This wonderful monument exerts a strong charm on me.
The tomb of Harwa spreads beneath the Assasif area. It covers a surface area of roughly half an acre and is the largest private tomb constructed in Egypt. The main entrance is to the south, where a portico leads into a vestibule. From here, one passes into an open-air courtyard. Along its northern and southern sides, 2 porticos supported by pillars once stood. From the courtyard, it is possible to enter the underground part of the tomb, oriented toward the west and expanding it to more than one level. The first level consists of 2 pillared halls that culminate in a shrine, which has carved in high relief an image of the god Osiris, the king of the dead, on the rear wall. A long corridor surrounds the entire subterranean level. The tomb of Harwa was never finished, and the northern section of the corridor was reused by his successor to the office of the Grand Major Domo of Divina Adoratrice Achimenru for his own burial. In the architectural development of the tomb of Harwa, there are some characteristics that are found in no other funerary monuments in Egypt. The corridor that encircles the central part of the burial is one of these unique features. It separates the burial ground from the surrounding area so that it resembles an island. The aim is to establish a connection with the myth of Osiris. It was on an island that the goddess Isis buried the body of her husband. The same concept inspired the construction of the Osirion, a subterranean structure datable to the 14th century BC, ordered by King Seti I at Abydos in order to faithfully imitate the burial place of Osiris. Harwa drew on this idea and adopted it for his funerary monument, thus reaffirming his identification with Osiris, which was every Egyptian's ambition to have after death. The tomb of Harwa was also conceived in such a way as to transpose the classical plane of the Egyptian temple into an underground structure. All the main elements are present: the courtyard, the pillared hall, and the decreasing dimensions of the rooms leading up to the shrine. It is clear that the tomb of Harwa was not conceived like a simple burial place, but like a monument in which the architecture and decoration was given important and precise meanings.
November 7th, 1996. We're closing the excavation. The results of our short stay here give us hope for the future. In my opinion, the most important discoveries from this year are not represented by what we recovered in the course of the excavation. Except for the fragment of the Ushabti of Harwa, there were no other important finds. I re-examined the inscriptions and the scenes that I copied last year from the walls of the 3 passages between the subterranean rooms. I realized that there's a relationship between them. The texts and figures can be read in sequence and tell a story. The story of man and his desire for eternal life. Covering the tomb from beginning to end is like making a journey that passes through the most important stages of human existence, as it was conceived by Egyptians in the 7th century BC. Life, death, rebirth, very close to our own conceptions of life. It's extraordinary. I've never found anything like this before now. The human existence is described like a journey that continues after death, a path, a road to eternity, the path of Harwa.
The path of Harwa develops along the main axis of the first subterranean level. The texts and the decoration of the passages from the rooms mark the 3 main stages leading to eternity: life, death, and rebirth. On the southern wall leading into the first pillared hall, a hieroglyphic inscription describes the life of Harwa. The text was conceived as if the deceased were speaking. I recount to you the actions I have accomplished on earth. Listen to me, you who are still alive. The inscription continues with the account of the good deeds of Harwa. I have given bread to the hungry and clothes to the naked. This was, of course, the ideal life in which I recorded the good deeds of the deceased. When Harwa had these sentences transcribed into his tomb, they were already 1,300 years old. They come from those texts elaborated between 2150 and 2000 BC, which document the birth of an individual awareness in Egypt of the first intermediate period. These words recall the behavioral rules elaborated by Western culture in the centuries immediately after the death of Harwa. It is very probable that the religious funerary concepts developed in Egypt during the 7th century BC served as a moral model for the later Mediterranean civilizations through the Greeks. Inside the path of Harwa, the decoration of the first pillared hall describes the passage of time. The sides of the pillars facing the central aisle once bore hieroglyphic inscriptions and scenes from the ritual of the hours. The northern row was dedicated to the hours of the day. The text developed from east to west and imitated the course of the sun in the sky throughout the day, while the text related to the hours of the night ran west to east on the southern row of pillars. In this way, they reproduced the course of the sun in the netherworld. For the Egyptians, when the sun set on the horizon, it would rise in the netherworld, a world that was imagined to mirror the real world, where the dawn was in the west and the sunset to the east. The central aisle of the first pillared hall was therefore conceived like a large virtual time machine that, through the description of the perpetual rising and setting of the sun, the idea of the eternal passage of time was given. Time has passed by. On the wall of the passage from the first pillared hall into the second, Harwa is represented in old age. He has a double chin, sagging breasts, and a prominent stomach. He is preceded by Anubis, the jackal god that in Egyptian funerary beliefs accompanied the dead into the netherworld. The scene is an allegory and represents the most dramatic moment of the path of Harwa, death. This inescapable event was represented in many other Egyptian tombs from the previous era. But in the tomb of Harwa, a new sentiment can be detected, the fear of man. This sensation is evident in how the god grasps the hand of the man. Anubis firmly grasps the hand of Harwa, who keeps his fingers outstretched. This gesture displays a desire to escape from a grip that, instead of being reassuring, anticipates the ultimate step from which there is no escape or return. The scene is carved in a very significant part of the tomb. This is the last wall that receives sunlight. Darkness was ready to welcome Harwa. The second pillared hall was decorated with the ritual of the opening of the mouth. It describes the official ceremonies performed during the funeral. The funerary priest touched the mouth, the eyes, the nose, and ears of the mummy and recited some formula designed to bring the dead person back to life and prepare him for the afterlife. Also in this case, the tomb of Harwa breaks away from tradition. Here, the ritual of the opening mouth did not assign a new life to the mummy. Rather, it involved the separation of the body from the vital essence of the individual. The path of Harwa reaches a crossroads at this point. In the northwest corner of the second pillared hall, there is a shaft that leads to a series of subterranean rooms on different levels.
November 8th, 1996. While the workmen and the other members of the mission complete the operation of closing the excavation, I decide to explore the subterranean levels of the tomb. I discover where the bats have been living. They flap around our tents. There are hundreds. I penetrated into the depths of the earth. The warmth was unbearable. As I proceeded, the acid odors of ammonia from the bat guano became more and more strong. Frightened by my presence, they retreat more and more into the depths of the earth. At last I find myself in a wide room with a vaulted ceiling. Here the bats seek shelter. Not able to escape, they fly in circles. There's so many that they raise a current of air. I move from the door and I wait for them to leave. When most have left, I'm able to observe my surroundings. The flashlight reveals that the ceiling was once painted. What little remains of an eye and a wig make me think that an image of the sky goddess Nut was once depicted. Traces of paint can also be seen on the walls, boats with gods and the black profile of demons. I think that the room was meant to reproduce the netherworld as arranged by the Egyptians, a place alien from the daily reality populated by bizarre beings, but lacking in that negative and frightening connotation attributed in Western civilization. Along the northern side of the room opens a funerary shaft, at least 15 feet deep, but I'm not able to descend. Down in the darkness, infested by bats, must be the final resting place of Harwa.
The subterranean rooms represent the final resting place of Harwa. Free from the burden of the body, the vital essence of Harwa can continue along the path towards eternal rebirth. This continues in the passage that, from the second pillared hall, leads into the shrine at the end of the first subterranean level. On the southern wall of the passage, a scene similar to this one, reproducing the allegory of death, is engraved. Anubis is represented here with two heads. This representation shows some second thoughts on the part of the artist. The original intention was to represent the god with his head turned backwards. Later it was decided, probably to provide greater similarity to the previous scene, to represent the god with his head facing forward. A coating of painted plaster had once covered the head that was turned backwards. In this scene, Anubis returns to grasp the hand of Harwa, represented this time with a slim and fit body. The separation from the body has freed the vital essence of the individual, who, eternally young, can finally complete the last step towards his new existence. In the shrine at the end of the first subterranean level, the path of Harwa reaches its apex. The man finds himself in the presence of Osiris and can take a place next to the king of the dead. A niche opens the northwest corner of the room. A seated statue of Harwa was found sculpted in the rock. The vital essence of the dead person would have resided in this image in eternal contemplation of Osiris. Here, where the path of Harwa ends, the fear of death returns. This fear is rendered through a particular architectural feature. The image in high relief of Osiris has reduced dimensions. It is the end of the sequence of rooms of the tomb that is visible from the entrance of the first pillared hall. From here it appears farther away than it is in reality. The figure of the god functions as the focal point of a true trompe-l'oeil. The illusion of distance achieved by the image of Osiris is a way to express architecturally the desire to delay the moment of death, the unavoidable and necessary condition to encounter the god.
September 30th, 1997. I'm in Cairo for 10 days. The permits to work at Harwa are late arriving. All of the most important authorities of the High Council of Antiquities are at Luxor to supervise the preparations for Aida at the temple of Hatshepsut. October 10th. Still no permits. Today, in order to pass the time, I re-examine the collection documented from the last year. I have translated the remains of the inscription that tell the ideal life of Harwa: to give bread to the hungry, clothes to the naked. Phrases that Harwa takes from older texts and that can be recognized in Christian morals. And also the separation of the body from the soul, or vital essence, if we want to call it that. The path of Harwa, with its 3 moments, remind me of Greek mystery cults, where the follower had to pass through an experience of death before being reborn and becoming initiated into the cult of the divinity. And this fear of death, although subtle and scarcely noticeable, in spite of everything, it is present. I have a clear impression that I've begun the excavation of a monument where the Egyptian civilization looks slightly different from what I've studied. I'm finding ideas and thoughts that will fully develop in the Mediterranean culture of the following centuries. I'm surprised and fascinated, but this only increases my desire to return to the excavation, and the permits have not arrived yet. October 18th, 1997. It's been 30 days since I arrived in Egypt. I'm sitting on the metal box with the finds from the last year. The tomb is finally open. I decided to begin to remove the debris from the first pillared hall. I divided the area into squares in order to have a better idea of the position of the decorated fragments that will be recovered. The workmen have finished the preliminary cleaning. We're able to begin. Thursday, October 30th. We've been excavating for 10 days. Based on the findings up to this point, it's possible to deduce that the first pillared hall was reused in the early centuries AD as a necropolis for the burial of lower-class persons. To the level of the pavement, we have in fact recovered glass vessels and bomb vessels datable from the 2nd and the 4th centuries AD that appear to be grave goods associated with poorly preserved skeletons. In some places of the hall, large areas of lime have been brought to light. Inside them, badly preserved human remains have been found. In the late antiquity, Luxor and Egypt suffered from epidemics. The pillared hall must have been used in one of those occasions to bury bodies of the plague victims. They were then covered with lime. This helped to avoid the spread of the contagion. Tuesday, November 4th. A discovery surpassing my wildest expectations. We're excavating in the center of the hall. Syed Abu Zaid brings to light the upper part of an Ushabti in serpentine of Harwa. It's the first one that we found with the head almost intact. The face is beautifully carved in a style inspired by sculptors of the Old Kingdom. The surprises don't stop there. A short time later, not far from where this Ushabti was found, Mohammed Sid Ahmed discovers the lower part of a second Ushabti, this time in limestone. This also seems to be of Harwa. The confirmation of this identification arrives a moment later. From the accumulation of lime emerges the upper part of an Ushabti. The color of the stone, red probably from exposure to high temperatures, is the same. The two parts fit together perfectly. The location of the finds is quite unusual. The Ushabtis were normally placed in close proximity to the sarcophagus. Instead, the two Ushabtis just discovered were found in the center of the first pillared hall. I think that one of many tomb robbers who came here before us lost them here. He must have taken them from the burial chamber. He dropped them while he was exiting the tomb. Covered by lime, they would not have been easy to recover. The more amazing thing is what the limestone Ushabti holds tightly between his hands. These statuettes were thought to carry out agricultural work in the fields of Osiris in place of the deceased, and normally have a hoe to till the earth and a basket to carry it with. The Ushabti of Harwa, instead, holds the crook and flail, the symbols of pharaonic royalty. Numerous examples exist of royal funerary statuettes with these attributes. What we've uncovered today is, to my knowledge, the only Ushabti of a private citizen who possesses such characteristics. Who was Harwa indeed? What role had he played in the history of his time? The day after tomorrow we close the excavation. It seems like a rule that the most important discoveries happen just before the end.
Harwa lived in the course of the 25th dynasty when the rulers of the Nile Valley came from the Nubia. Between the 10th and 8th century, Egypt had lost a great deal of its power and a large number of its territories. In the same period, in southern Nubia, the northern part of present-day Sudan, an independent reign whose origins still remain wrapped in mystery, was developing. El Kuru, located near the fourth cataract of the Nile, approximately 260 miles north of Khartoum. This site was used as a burial place by the early kings of the Sudanese reign. With their growing power, these monarchs began to emulate Egypt and at the same time saw it as a natural outlet for expansion towards the north. From simple tombs, the royal bearers of El Kuru, following the line of development that the Egyptian royal tombs had covered more than 1,500 years before, gradually transformed into pyramids. Around 750 BC, the Nubian state was strong enough to try the conquest of Egypt. The first Nubian monarch to push north with an army was Kashta. It is perhaps this event that led Amenirdes, daughter of Kashta, to become adopted as the god-wife of Amun at Thebes. The function of god-wife of Amun was a religious position that had existed for centuries. Before the arrivals of the Nubians, it had been used by the Libyan monarchs, which then were governing in northern Egypt, in order to diminish the independence of the Theban clergy. The northern monarchs had imposed the appointment of Shepenupet, a princess from the ruling house, to god-wife, in order to exercise control of the temple of Amun at Karnak, which was the most powerful temple dominating all of southern Egypt. Kashta just followed this tradition, imposing the adoption of his daughter Amenirdes to Shepenupet. It is very likely that this event signified the passage of Thebes into the Nubian sphere of influence. With Kashta comes the beginning of the 25th dynasty. The first victorious military campaigns in which Memphis, the old Egyptian capital a little south of modern Cairo, was captured so as to be attributed to the son and successor Pianki. The inscriptions left from Pianki to commemorate the event are recorded in hieroglyphics and demonstrate a deep respect for the Egyptian civilization. The king entered Thebes without a fight. Here he did not miss the opportunity to honor Amun and celebrate festivals in his honor. He then turned his attention to the northern regions, at that time subdivided into several states in which Libyan kings ruled. These joined together in a coalition in order to face the Nubian threat. The march of the Sudanese army was marked by a series of victories and led to the definite defeat of Tefnakht, the leader of the Libyan alliance. After his victory, Pianki returned to the Sudanese capital, Napata, whose ruined temples are still visible today at the foot of the Geb el-Barakah, the sacred mountain near the fourth cataract of the Nile. The city marked the southern limit of Egyptian conquest in Sudanese territory nearly 700 years before. Here Thutmose III, Tutankhamun, Horemheb, and Ramses II constructed and widened a temple dedicated to the god of Thebes, Amun, that in this period had begun to be associated with a ram-shaped Sudanese god. The area had then been chosen by the Sudanese monarchs to be their capital. Perhaps the choice was made due to the connection with its glorious Egyptian past. Pianki returned to Napata, leaving the political situation in Egypt almost unchanged. The Libyan monarchs or their sons continued to maintain control of the northern states. The situation changed drastically with Shabako, successor of Pianki, who imposed major political pressure and even resided at Memphis for long periods. Such an attitude was also maintained by his successors to the throne of Nubia, Shebitko, and Taharko. Taharko was responsible for the major building works of the 25th dynasty in Egypt, like the imposing kiosk that once served as a monumental entrance to the temple of Amun at Karnak. Harwa lived under Taharko, who reigned from 690 to 664.
November 7th, 1997. Yesterday we closed the excavation. The discovery of the Ushabti with royal attributes has made me decide to stop at Luxor again for a few days. I intend to examine this new discovery in more depth, relating it to the 25th dynasty monuments. Today I went to Medinet Habu, where the chapels of the god-wives are. The generally accepted theory is that through this important female religious position, the kings of the 25th Theban dynasty controlled the Theban theocratic state. Harwa, as great majordomo of the god-wife of Amun, should have been subordinate to her. But there's something strange. There are disproportionate differences between funerary monuments of the god-wives and those of Harwa and other civil officials, like Montemhat and Petamenofis, who had chosen to be buried in Assasif afterwards.
The tombs of the godwives of Amun were built inside the sacred precinct of the temple of Ramesses III at Medinet Habu, just in front of the pylon of the huge sanctuary. They consist of subterranean crypts with the chapels built above them. The chapel of Ebenirdes is better preserved than the others. It is in the form of a temple. A small courtyard in the center, in which there was found an offering table, gives access to a shrine surrounded by a corridor whose walls are decorated with the ritual of the opening of the mouth. It is very probable that Harwa would have supervised the construction of the chapel, whose decoration has various features in common with the reliefs of his tomb.
The visit to the chapel of Amenirtis has led me to a series of thoughts. Is it not possible that in the course of the reign of Daharko, there was a change in the management of the power at Thebes? How much political weight did the god-wives have in state affairs at Thebes? And still, the same question, who was Harwa? September 27th, 1998. This year there were no problems with the permits. Already at 9:30, the tomb was opened. September 28th, 1998. I resume working where I left off last year. This year we should be able to finish removing the debris from the first pillared hall. October 3rd, 1998. I asked the workmen to continue the cleaning of guano from the walls of the second pillared hall. In addition to the 2 workers trained in the proper cleaning method, another worker is added. October 26th, 1998. We finally finished the work in the first pillared hall. Today, we've begun to excavate in the shrine of Osiris, the last area on the first subterranean level still covered in debris. The tomb is reacquiring its old magnificence. November 5th, 1998. We've gone the last week of work without workmen in order to finish photographing the finds recovered in the course of excavation. Today, before closing the tomb, I stopped on the threshold of the first pillared hall. For the first time, my eyes were able to reach the shrine of Osiris and see the immense areas cleared of debris. It was a truly moving moment, my heart filled with satisfaction at the job completed this far. October 12th, 1999. I've arrived at Cairo, inexpressibly tired. The opening of the exhibition, The Path of Harwa at Brescia, has truly destroyed me, but it was worth it. We were able to reunite 4 of the 8 statues of Harwa. For me, it's been an occasion to directly compare them and to try to pierce through the mystery surrounding Harwa.
The statues of Harwa are varied in style and modeling. They could be dated from many different periods of Egyptian history. If it weren't for the hieroglyphic texts, it would be difficult to attribute them to Harwa. A conscious reference to models from the past is noticeable in them, but they are re-elaborated and updated to find new solutions. This is clear in the statue in the British Museum, the only one of its kind. where Harwa is seated behind the goddess Isis and the godwife of Amun-Amenertes. In the feature of Harwa's face, a true attempt at portraiture can be perceived that is even more marked in the statue of him seated, conserved at Aswan. The face of Harwa is that of an old man with wrinkles and sagging cheeks. The artist has abandoned the typical ideals of abstract beauty of Egyptian art to give vivid prominence to the physical defects that the old age has on the body. The head is on the body of a fat man squatting with his left leg raised. Although it appears unusual, this pose is inspired by sculptures from the Old Kingdom that until this moment had not been produced in more than 1,000 years. The statues of Harwa represent a desire to recall the past through the re-elaboration of shapes and styles, introducing updated solutions for the time. And that is similar to the feeling which inspired the Italian artists from the 1400 and 1500 centuries. This is the reason why the period in which Harwa lived is referred to as the Egyptian Renaissance.
October 31st, 1999. I've decided to begin excavating the courtyard. I need more workmen, and I decided to hire 20. Today, 100 people showed up. Enormous confusion. At the end, I hired 25. It's difficult to select laborers, and on these occasions it's very helpful to have the presence of the Rais, the chief of the workmen, who's in charge of supervising the workers' activities. Also this year, I'm taking advantage of the experience and the authority of Rais Hassan Mohammed Shams ed-Din, who's worked for more than 30 years with the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities. Sheikh Hassan, as he's called by everyone, advises us on who to hire, not always based on working ability. Therefore, beside laborers like Mohammed Sid Ahmed, Syed Abu Zaid, Mohammed Abd el-Megid, Ali Sabra, Taji, Kenei, Ahmed Ab al-Rasek, Mohammed Shams, and Abu el-Off. Also, these years I've been forced to hire individuals because they need to work. Like Mursi Abbas Selim, who's 82 years now. The Rais has said to me that I must take him because he must maintain a young and expensive wife. The other laborers, he's assured me, need to work. This second version seems more sensible to me. He's so old that he's unable to walk. November 6th, 1999. The excavation of the courtyard was begun today. We opened 2 sections, one along the northern part and another in the south. We still have difficulty explaining to the laborers what we mean by stratigraphic excavation. What most surprises them is that instead of removing the sand in the shortest possible time, we expect them to remove it only a little at a time. Most difficult for them to understand is that they stop when the soil changes in consistency and color. Some of our colleagues still pay the laborers according to the volume of debris removed. I had to give my personal assurances that they will receive the same wage no matter the amount of work. November 15th, 1999. The laborers begin to assimilate the rules of scientific excavation. To follow limits of a layer is not always obvious, especially in the desert. But the laborers are natives and many of them are peasants. They know this earth like no one else. Just today I had an argument with Mohammed and Syed over a layer. At the end, I had to take their advice. It's a defeat and a victory at the same time. November 27th, 1999. Over the last days, we've concentrated our efforts in the southern sector. Here, where once a portico was erected, we've uncovered new scenes from the decoration of the rear wall and from the base of a pillar. Some reliefs were already visible before we began excavating and showed traces of a recent robbery. Wide portions are missing, and the figures bear the signs of depredation. In the course of our work, we discovered a trench, probably dug by the tomb robbers in order to detach pieces from the wall. The stratigraphic method allowed us to date it to the period of the Second World War.
The southern portico was decorated with a series of registers in which there were representations of everyday life. There were shepherds with herds of sheep, donkeys and cows, peasants harvesting grain, hunters, scribes, and sculptors. The figures are depicted in fine and delicate bas-relief to imitate the decoration of the tombs of the Old Kingdom nobles. The echoes of an era of almost 1,500 years before are so accurate that even the hieroglyphic captions of the scene follow rules in use during the Old Kingdom. The artists of Harwa elaborate art from the Egyptian past according to the new outlines, not lacking in delightful innovations, like in the case of the fishing scene. On the rear wall, there are representations of some fishermen. On the side of the pillar perpendicular to this scene, the figure of a seated man, concentrated in cleaning fish, is engraved. The two scenes are placed in such a way as to correlate an admirably studied perspective. For a visitor facing the portico, the man who is cleaning the fish appears to be in the foreground, as if he were on the riverbank. The same river reproduced in the background, where the other fishermen continue to fish.
Saturday, October 28th, 2000. I've been in Luxor for a while, but just today we reopened Harwa. This year, I've decided to concentrate our efforts in front of the main entrance of the tomb. I hope to uncover at least part of the access ramp. In order to accomplish this, we must remove an immense amount of debris to the east of the entrance that in some points is more than 18 feet high. Monday, October 30th, 2000. We're finding debris over debris over debris. The wall of sand and limestone fragments in front of the workers grows higher and higher, and it's like a gigantic wave in danger of submerging them. Sunday, November 5th, 2000. The bottom of the cliff begins to appear. It's possible to see a worker corner. We believe that it could be the beginning of an older excavation. The actual situation leaves thousands of conjectures and makes me want the next day of excavation to come as soon as possible.
عبي دخ يا سيد وعبي زي النار عبي المقطاف كويس.
Tuesday, November 21st, 2000. Sand, sand, and more sand. It never seems to end. The excavation continues in this way for days. A large part of a worked side of the cliff has been exposed. It seems that we're excavating a quarry. Thursday, November 26th, 2000. I'm now sure that we are excavating a quarry. I find consolation in the shortage of finds by thinking that discovering a tomb in a necropolis, as I hoped, is common. To discover a quarry is not. Thursday, November 30th, 2000. Today we found a jar against the eastern wall of the quarry. It's datable to the age of Harwa. The laborers who worked on the tomb must have used the quarry to obtain limestone blocks in order to patch the natural leaks that run through the cliff of Assasif. The jar found this morning must have been left by one of the laborers of Harwa. It's another sign that the work was suddenly interrupted. October 14th, 2001. This year, I've decided to divide the autumn campaign into two parts. For the first month, we'll excavate the courtyard. At the end of November, when Ramadan begins, we'll try to remove debris from the deepest rooms of the tomb. November 7th, 2001. I really did not expect this. In 1999, We hadn't excavated in front of the northern portico because the visible part of the wall did not show even a trace of decoration. Today, the removal of one of the many layers of soil has revealed that this wall is also decorated. Out of the sand appeared some reliefs of exquisite workmanship. The reliefs are upper parts of some offering bearers headed towards the tomb. What has been revealed so far leaves me literally without words. The modeling of the figures is exceptional. November 15th, 2001. Today, Ramadan begins. We are forced to interrupt the excavation of the courtyard. Such a pity, now that the new reliefs were discovered. But the laborers cannot work under the sun while they are fasting. From Saturday on, we move our work inside the tomb. Another challenge awaits us, the removal of debris from the lower levels of the tomb, where once Harwa must have been buried. Friday, December 7th, 2001. I ask myself if we will succeed in finishing the excavation of the funerary room. The work progresses steadily but slowly. It's clear that the room had been visited many times over the course of the centuries. Hope springs eternal. By now, we've already recovered more than 200 fragments of stone and faience ushabtis of Harwa. But we've also found traces of previous visits by tomb robbers. From the debris, some limestone fragments have been brought to light that arouse many questions in me. Tuesday, December 11th, 2001. We're at the end of the excavation. We've recovered other limestone pieces with a semicircular cornice. Remains of hieroglyphics, traced in red ink, are still visible on the surface of some. It's useless to hide the fact that I'm disappointed when I realize that they could be the remains of Harwa's sarcophagus. The preliminary reconstruction appears very vague and leaves me doubtful. Saturday, December 14th, 2001. The cool days of winter have arrived, and the moon of Ramadan is now reduced to a thin sliver. Only 2 days before I leave. We were unable to complete the excavation of the subterranean levels. I'm forced to wait for a year. Saturday, December 21st, 2002. A year later, we resumed the removal of debris from the lower rooms of the subterranean levels. The air stinks badly. The dust raised by excavation mainly consists of bat guano. The workmen are forced to wear gas masks and plastic goggles in order to work. Thursday, December 26th, 2002. We've recovered other decorated limestone blocks. Thus, I was able to get a better idea of what there was in one of the 2 rooms, but the result doesn't make sense. The only reconstructible thing from the pieces recovered up until now is a tabernacle, not a sarcophagus, as I believed at first. Monday, January 13th, 2003. The mission will soon be concluded, and it's time to pull together the results. What can I draw from the experience? Are there more resolved problems or raised questions? The latter seems true. What is the purpose of a tabernacle, normally used to accommodate the statue of a god, in the place where we'd hoped to find the sarcophagus of Harwa? Until this year, I'd always believed we were excavating the burial chamber. My certainty has begun to waver. The game is reopened. Where was Harwa buried? June 12th, 2003. I'm in Cairo in order to study the statues of Harwa held in the museum. Today I entered the storerooms to examine and photograph the group statue of Harwa portrayed between father and mother. It's unpublished, and this is the first time I've seen it. It's extraordinary. If it hadn't been for the inscriptions, I would have dated it to the Middle Kingdom. It's another manifestation of the Egyptian Renaissance. Here the imitation of the art of the Middle Kingdom is extraordinary. It's just like a statue of that age, in which Harwa has carved his name and those of his parents.
Besides the statues, there are many other works related to Harwa conserved in several Egyptian collections. At the Museum of the Eremitani at Padua, the coffin of the Chantress Avul Meritarum is exhibited. The inscriptions assert that she was the daughter of Harwa. In the United States, in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, 2 fragments coming from the decoration of the tomb are conserved. Still in Boston, there is the upper part of the granite Ushabti of Harwa. This one, like the limestone Ushabti uncovered in the tomb in 1997, holds the attributes of pharaonic kingship in its hands.
The information that I've successfully collected in the last months on objects related to Harwa allow me to delineate with great clarity his enigmatic figure. By now I'm convinced that he was in charge of the management of Thebes and all of Upper Egypt. The godwife of Amun Amenirtis had to exercise control on behalf of the pharaohs of the 25th dynasty. But it was Harwa who effectively held the power. After him, the Theban state would have been governed by Montuemhat and Petamenophis, whose tombs are to the west and east of Harwa's and are larger. This hypothesis receives more support from the data I collected, but only continuation of the excavation can determine if my reasoning is correct or not. November 2nd, 2003. Here I am again in Gurna. I've been excavating for nearly 10 years in the tomb of Harwa. The enthusiasm is always the same as the first time. Also this morning, at the opening of the gate that protects the tomb, I was unable not to feel an emotion of happiness. We start anew. We resume working in the courtyard. Goodness knows what other surprises Harwa has in store. November 20th, 2003. The excavation goes more slowly than in previous seasons. We run into an infinite series of robbers' pits. Each must be documented with precision, a time-consuming process. December 16th, 2003. It was about time. We finally succeeded in freeing the lower part of the registry of reliefs with the offering bearers. Their figures are so delicately carved in the limestone they take my breath away. A portion of the lower wall is also uncovered. One can just catch a glimpse of roughly sketched figures in red ink. The work of the decorators seems to have been unexpectedly interrupted here as well. January 8th, 2004. In the more western part of the northern portico, a new series of reliefs has been discovered.
The figures of the offering bearers imitate those found in tombs from the Old Kingdom. Like in the case of the man with the small calf, it resumes an iconography full of nostalgia, nearly 2,000 years old. The head of the animal is turned to the rear, and the vexed expression on its snout places an accent on the moment of the separation, on the departure without hope of return that the calf is destined to take. In tombs of the Old Kingdom, the offering bearers were imprinted with a sense of repetition and a rigid, orderly treatment of the figurative space. In the tomb of Harwa, each and every figure is precious in itself, with its own space and rhythm passing through it and making it vibrate. The same feeling is perceptible in the dance sequences recorded in the lower register. These scenes are exactly paralleled in the tomb of Imeri at Giza, datable to the 24th century BC. But in the figures of the dancers in the tomb of Harwa, there is an observation of the human body absent in the older scenes.
January 14th, 2004. There's just a little more than 1 week before the end of the excavation. The scene with the dancers is completely free from the sand. The interest in the musculature demonstrated by the artist in the realization of these figures is one of many innovative characteristics of the tomb of Harwa. Perspective, motion, trompe-l'œil, archaism. They're artistic signs that are found again hundreds of years later in the Italian Renaissance. The Egyptian artists of the 7th century BC didn't have the figurative language needed to fully express these concepts. Nevertheless, they manifested them clearly. The tomb of Harwa is demonstrating itself a true masterpiece. I think that my opinion was shared by those who lived after him. The other high officials who decided to be buried in the Assasif chose as a source of inspiration the decoration and the architecture of the tomb of Harwa when they decided to create their own burials. I feel confident in asserting that the architect who planned the tomb of Harwa and directed the workers here had to be of the caliber of Michelangelo, Leonardo, or Bernini. One day, I hope to discover his name, a desire nearly impossible to realize due to the anonymous nature of Egyptian art. January 24th, 2004, Cairo. The tomb is closed, the campaign is over, and I find myself writing from here under a sky covered in white clouds, the same sky that I left at Luxor. Even though the excavation is over, I would like to go back, to resume the work. The curiosity to discover new things is strong, and an archaeologist has to constantly repress it. To know how to wait. It's so difficult when the memory of the digging hours is still fresh. To know how to wait, to chomp at the bit. So difficult. Yes, but it's part of this wonderful and thrilling adventure. That's the excavation of the tomb of Harwa.
leone, nella trappola sono caduti, allo scorpione sulla rana, non importa di affogare. أبو خالص مفيش سلام وما بس يعيش. أبو خالص مفيش سلام وما بس يعيش.